Greetings, leaders. Welcome to Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Development. I'm here to talk to you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you on platforms like Spotify, Apple, and many more. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make in a podcast in one place. So listen, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And always remember, leadership is influence and service.
My philosophy, my soapbox these days is, why are we not training people to be leaders the minute they walk in the door? And then whether they actually ascend to leadership or not is up to them. Some people do like that. Some people like to be in leadership roles, and other people like to be more of the behind the scenes player. But meanwhile, you have not hurt your organization at all by giving everybody leadership skills.
Greetings, leaders, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Development. This is Season 2, Episode 2, Leadership from Day 1, with the training doctor, Dr. Nanette Miner. Leadership is a responsibility. However, for most, it's a misunderstood privilege. Today's guest will dispel the myths and bring clarity to what leadership truly is about. Let's talk about it. Greetings, leaders, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Leadership Is Podcast. I am your host, Jason Muhammad, founder of JM Leadership Development. Today's special guest is Dr. Nanette Miner, who is better known as the training doctor. She started working at the age of 11, and couldn't foresee and can't foresee a day when she's going to stop. Everything about business is intriguing and exhilarating to her. She's worked in a wide range of industries, including finance, pharma, manufacturing, consulting, hospitality, broadcasting, oil and gas, professional services, the U.S. military, and more. She spent 25 years consulting with Fortune 500 companies on talent and performance, and realized that the number one thing they get wrong is how they develop their future leaders, if they develop them at all. So she's on a mission to help organizations to sustain their success through preparing their future leaders. Welcome, Dr. Nanette Miner.
Wow, Jason, thank you. And I am on a mission. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I see you on Facebook and, other things that you're actually doing, and the information that you share, about something that DDI, Development Dimensions International, calls the bench.
Right.
And how they talk about, the bench is not being successfully placed strategically, rather, so that when, senior leadership moves on or changes, then there's someone that can step up into the plate. So before we get deep into that rich conversation, besides what I read in your resume, who are you and what do you do?
All right. Well, you covered most of it. I founded a company called The Training Doctor in 1991. So our 30th anniversary will be next month, June of 2021. And for the first 25 years, we developed custom designed curriculums, mostly for sales and leadership, and then handed it back to the clients for implementation. So we're not subject matter experts, as you listed off the number of industries that we worked in. The industry doesn't matter. Our expertise is in how adults learn and in the workplace, and especially how do you get that learning transferred so they're actually changing their behavior when they get back on the job, which is the purpose of the training. Yeah. So about 5 years or so ago, when the U.S. Census said by 2030, all the boomers were going to be out of the workforce, I had an aha moment when I realized we in corporate America, although I consulted to them, but I consider myself part of corporate America, we have not been adequately preparing people to step into leadership roles. And so I started doing some research, and I did pivot in the company and said, that's it, all we're doing for the next, for the foreseeable future until I decide to retire will be leadership development, because it is so badly needed. And there are a lot of things that conspired against corporate America to get their leaders in place. One being the size of the boomer generation and how big it is, and how not just population wise, but how many decades it covers. It's almost a 2-decade generation, which is huge compared to any other generation. And then because there's been such advances in health, a lot of boomers have stayed on the job well beyond when most people would have retired. The standard retirement age used to be early 60s to 65. And now, we had a client a few years ago who was 72, and once a year I'd say to him, when are you going to retire? And he'd say, why retire? And I'm like, because I don't know. It just seems like you'd want to retire. But he's like, I love what I do. But the problem, Jason, is that because the boomers stayed on the job so long, nobody got the next generation, Gen X, prepared for leadership roles, because the boomers basically had all the leadership roles. And so leadership development fell by the wayside, really. Let's not say it's leadership development. Succession planning fell by the wayside, because there really wasn't a need to have that bench strength, because the boomer generation was so big that even if a older boomer left a leadership position, a younger boomer was probably going to fill it. So Gen X and especially millennials have really had no leadership development, formal in most organizations. Probably 90% of the organizations. And the other problem is that corporate America forever has waited until someone has been promoted to a leadership role and then given them leadership training, which I think is ludicrous, because you're then asking two reasons. One, you're asking somebody to take on new functional responsibilities. And then two, you're asking them to change their behavior at the same time. And then the second reason is that behavior is the hardest thing for us to change in someone. It's really not so much what they do, it's how they think. And if you had people who are operating in one way or with one mindset for the first 15, 20 years of their work life, and then you say to them, hey, that's not how you talk to your employees, or that's not how you give feedback, or that's not how you should be following up on, you don't want to be a micromanager. If you wait until they've already been practicing those skills for 20 years and then tell them you got to change how you're behaving, it's nearly impossible to get people to do that. So my philosophy, my soapbox these days is, why are we not training people to be leaders the minute they walk in the door? And then whether they actually ascend to leadership or not, is up to them. Some people do like that. Some people like to be in leadership roles, and other people like to be more of the behind the scenes player. But meanwhile, you have not hurt your organization at all by giving everybody leadership skills, right? It's a rising tide lifts all boats philosophy. If everybody's a better communicator, a better problem solver, a better decision maker, they work more collaboratively, how can you argue against having everyone have those skills?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're correct about that. And so that's going to kind of bring us to our next question here. One of the things is I've looked at some research, and the percentage of HR saying they have a strong bench to fill leadership roles in 2011 was 18%. 2014, it was 15%. 2017, it was 14%. And 2020, it's down to 11%. And so, there seems to be, Dr. Nanette, a disconnect between the leadership and the HR representatives, as well as it relates to, their leadership development programs and strength. So, going into the next question is, what is this concept that you have of, and you kind of went into it there, of leadership from day one?
Yes, I did kind of lead us right into that. So I just feel I've got a framework that we can customize more for our clients, depending on their industry, their business goals, to give their workers leadership capabilities and an understanding of what a leader's role is. One of the problems that corporate America has done for decades at least 30 years now, is trained people in silos. So if you enter a company in, say, a finance role, and you're lucky enough to get professional development, because not a lot of companies even offer professional development, but if you were to get professional development, 99% of the time, it's still going to be in finance. We're just going to make you a better financier, right? But we're not going to teach you how operations work, or how sales work, or how HR works. And so one of the things we've done very poorly in corporate America is make people who understand how a business runs. And that's a leadership skill, right? You can't run the business if you don't understand how the business runs. So the leadership from day one concept is two sides of a scale, really. One, you should just be learning what we call leadership skills, and I'm doing air quotes here, but really they're just soft skills. I think the reason we call them leadership skills is because we wait until we promote people to leadership roles, and then we start giving them these skills. But as I said earlier, if it's conversational skills, problem solving, decision making, working collaboratively, what makes that a leadership skill? Nothing. It's everybody should and can have those skills. So on the one hand, I feel we need to give people those soft skills the moment they walk in the door, start developing those soft skills. But the other side of that equation is we also have to teach people how the business runs. So a lot of the activities that we will customize for a client have to do with, do you want people to know how much money you make, or how your company makes money? Because I bet you if you polled 100 people in a particular company, 90% of them would say, I don't really know how we make money, right? Like I worked with a client years ago, it was in retail, and I was shocked to learn that they only keep 3 cents on every dollar. When you figure all of the work that goes into running a retail location, and at that time that company had 36 locations in like 5 or 6 states, the overhead and the logistics of running a retail organization is overwhelming to, in the end, keep 3 cents on every dollar. So a lot of times, people just don't even know how their company makes or keeps money. They don't know necessarily who their customers are. I find that a lot of people know what their job is, but they don't know what their job is in the bigger context. So the other side of developing people's skills, or soft skills, I should say, is also teaching them how your business operates.
Yeah. So tell me something. What is then, when you talk about leadership and leadership soft skills, what's your definition of leadership?
Well, I would say if you were looking for a future leader, like if you were to look among your employees and say, who among this, would I like to groom? I would say it's somebody who steps up and goes beyond, above and beyond what is necessary. Somebody maybe who sticks their neck out, who, for instance, in a meeting, if they're a junior, quote unquote, person, but they, interrupt politely, of course, in a meeting and say, well, wait a second, have we considered this? Or, I know that our competitor is doing this other thing. Like, to me, that's a person who has skin in the game. If they're a person who really wants to contribute to the organization, or if they just, if they come to you and they say, I'm kind of bored in my job, I'd love to do something that's a special project, or is it okay if, I do 2 hours, 3 hours a week in this other department because I'd like to learn how this other department works. Somebody who steps up and shows initiative, I guess, would be my definition. Now, whether they like to manage other people is an entirely different thing. But at least they have, and not everybody who is a leader has to lead other people. A lot of people, are quiet leaders in their organization. It's like, well, before we do this, we should probably see what Jason thinks about it. That Jason doesn't have a title, but Jason is a big picture thinker. Jason knows how the organization works. Jason would tell us who to go to if he didn't know the answer. That kind of presence in an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that so many organizations make the mistake of promoting the wrong talent match. I've even read in this book titled "It's the Manager" by Jim Clifton and Jim Harder, surrounding Gallup research, and they state that that promoting the wrong person into these leadership positions 82% of the time, and so. Yeah. And so, of course, when your organization is offering, this perk package, of a good parking here, and you get this bump in your raise, payment, and you get to lead, these amount of people. Well, that's a good perk package. Who wouldn't want that kind of a, perk package, right?
Right.
But again, with no leadership development of this individual, you have a tendency to produce, 3 out of 4 of your employees being disengaged, which, leads back to the 75% of the reason why people quit their jobs is because of because of that relationship with that manager. So,
Right.
how can leaders improve on building their next generation of leaders? How can they really improve on that?
Well, I would say let's start over. Erase everything you know about leadership development. Erase everything you see done in terms of leadership development. So start developing people the minute they walk in the door, rather than waiting 20 years and promoting them.
That's
I think the other benefit, promoting them and then training them. I think the other benefit of training people to move up in the organization is that you then don't suffer from having to hire someone in from the outside who potentially has a different value system or different operating culture than your organization, because that's the way that they, quote unquote, grew up. That's the way they learned it. If you're grooming your own leaders from internally, then you're grooming people who will comply with your value system and the culture of your organization, because they are a part of it. They understand it. Because I'm sure you have statistics as well about how many leaders flame out after they've been brought into an organization from outside. I don't know the percentage, but I know the period of time is about 18 months for outside leaders to either make it or flame out. So I would say, how do you build or improve upon building next generation of leaders? One, start immediately. Stop doing it the way we've been doing it. Stop training in silos. Get people cross-pollinated. Not only is that process important for them to understand how the business runs, but it's also important for them to understand who else they work with. Because when I'm a consultant and I go into an organization, I ask to have a tour, and whomever is in charge will walk me around and explain things to me and give me a good understanding of how the business runs. And then inevitably, I will be working with someone later on down the road, and I'll say, oh, well, so-and-so over in this department. And they'll say, oh, I don't know so-and-so. Or, oh, I didn't know that department did that. And I can tell you, this happens like 100% of the time. I'm thinking, how do I know more about your company than you do? Right. So not only do we train people in silos, we keep them in their silos. So when you're going to conduct training, like say you're going to do a finance class or a HIPAA class or a diversity inclusion class, you need to have people in mixed cohorts. So you need to have 2 from HR, 2 from finance, 2 from operations, 2 from shipping, so that people not only learn the content, but learn about each other. It's so much easier to work in a business when you can say, well, I don't know if this is a good idea, but if we call Frank in finance, he's at least a sounding board, right? At least have somebody. But if I don't know Frank in finance, if I don't know anybody in finance, I would never think to do that. So you want to start cross-pollinating people so they know one another in the organization. And then a third thing I would suggest is to really, and this is very crucial, I think, because of the pandemic, you really want to start implementing mentoring and coaching as a leadership development process. Too few organizations use mentoring. And as I said earlier, the boomers are projected to be out of the workforce by 2030, which could have been speeded up. I actually have my research assistant looking into that right now, because I know a lot of boomers, because of the pandemic, said, that's it, I'm not going back. This isn't worth it. Especially the older ones who, are quote unquote beyond retirement age. They're like, well, why am I still doing this? This is ludicrous. Right. So I'm checking to see when the boomers are now projected to be out of the workforce. But we're just going to let a lot of people with institutional knowledge and operational knowledge out the door without transferring that before they leave. And we've been talking about knowledge transfer for probably 20 years, but we're really not doing it. We've just been talking about it for 20 years. And coaching, in my opinion, is the profession of the future in terms of how businesses run, because Gen Z, which is our youngest generation, which is just entering the workforce now, but millennials and Gen Z together will be bigger than the boomers were. Gen Z doesn't really believe in leadership. they are much more egalitarian. They're much more about equality and fairness. And so, and again, they just entered the workforce. So I guess we're hypothesizing based on how they're operating in schools and in college, but their outlook is, why would we designate one person a leader? So if you don't want to have a leader, then everybody needs to have leadership capabilities, or the organization is going to go down the tubes. But one of the things that's very important is coaching, because you need someone, if not directing your activities, objectively giving you guidance in terms of your career.
Yeah.
So, observing you in meetings and saying, have you noticed that you cut people off all the time? Or, all you have to do is say, Jason, that was actually I want to build on what you've just said, Jason, as opposed to just kind of ignoring what Jason said and going on off on your own tangent. So coaching, because companies are running so lean and mean these days, and I really believe that the people who are in charge of the functional operations cannot be spread thin to ask them to be coaches as well. They're just trying to make the numbers, whatever they are judged on, to then ask them to, make sure that everybody is okay. And, employing empathy, which we've been hearing a lot in the last year, is like the number one skill. I really, really think that companies need to have on-site coaches. If not, and I suggested this idea probably 4 or 5 years ago, if not a two manager model, where every management role is really two people, one that manages the functional side and one that manages the people side, for us to be operating on all cylinders all the time. I really do think we need both of that. And I don't think it's one person.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100% with that. So if you were talking to, let's say, a Gen Zers right now, or even millennials, what are 3 leadership tips that you would offer them right now?
It's good that you said Gen Z and millennials, because you have to start early in your career. So I'd say, number one, obviously, don't wait for your employer to do it, because we know that if they stick with their standard operating procedure, they're going to pick and choose who they develop, and it may not be you. So you decide if you want to be a leader, and you start developing your own skills. So that would be number 2. How do you do that? There's so many resources now, as opposed to, when I entered business, you can go on YouTube and look up things that you are interested in. LinkedIn Learning is a pretty nominal fee. I know we have one client who actually pays for it for all their employees. They have the enterprise version of it. You can at least become more knowledgeable. I'm not a fan of e-learning or, getting my knowledge from YouTube, because it's one-way information. So it's really more a presentation and not learning, because I can't ask anybody questions. But at least you're going to be more knowledgeable about how businesses work, or what you are particularly interested in. And then the big thing that I think everybody can and should do is volunteer in some way. I would say do it for your professional association. But, if you don't have one, like if you're an accountant, there will be one. If you're in finance, there will be one. If you're in training and development, there will be a professional association. But there's possibly jobs that don't have a professional association associated with them. So then volunteer in the community. But the reason you want to volunteer is because you'll actually gain incredible business skills.
Yeah.
Let's say you're a graphic designer. Are you going to become the vice president of design at your organization by the time you're 25 or 28? No. But if you join a professional association, you probably could be the vice president of marketing for that professional association by the time you're 25 or 28. And then with that title, you're going to have to learn how to coordinate projects, how to interact with and give assignments to other people, how to be accountable to a board, how to have conversations and make presentations, how to work or converse with other people at your business meetings. So you're going to learn incredible leadership skills, which will also look great on your resume if and when you want to promote your ability to be a future leader, which you'll just get so much faster and so more quickly in terms of years, but also more rapidly in terms of how fast something like that happens. If your professional association holds an event every year, you're going to learn all of those skills in your first year, which you may not on the job. And you probably could be the vice president of marketing or the vice president of membership I know when I first started in my professional association, I joined the membership committee, and I think I probably within a year or two became the vice president of membership. And the reason I thought that was a great position was because it gave me the license to call anybody new in the organization or who recently joined or basically anyone and say, hey, I'm the vice president of membership. I just wanted to welcome you. And so it gave me the ability to start networking with people in my profession, but not in my company. Yeah. So that's a huge plus as well. So those three things: don't wait, take control. Don't wait for, I hope someday I get discovered as a leadership material and they start promoting me or training me. Take all the free and low-cost learning you can get. LinkedIn Learning and things like Coursera and edX will offer you the ability to get certificates, and then those can be linked to your LinkedIn profile. So I think that shows great initiative, like I was talking about earlier. If somebody looks at your education or your jobs history and they're like, oh, well, you're still on your first job, but then they scroll down and they go, oh, but you got 6 certificates while you were still in your first job. That shows initiative, right?
Right.
And then volunteer in the community and document what you've done as a volunteer, because that's not going to show up in your LinkedIn profile. So make sure you put that in your resume as well.
Very good, Doctor. Do you have any closing comments, or how can people connect with you and to move forward in their leadership development?
Sure. So they can find us at trainingdr.com is our website, or on Facebook, The Training Doctor, 3 words, The Training Doctor. I would say my closing comments are, we are in a crisis situation when it comes to leadership. We have had our head in the sand for too long because the boomers held the majority of leadership positions and things were going along swimmingly. And so nobody really had to look to the future. And now the future came and met us really, really fast, and we're not prepared. So I think companies need to double down, and it doesn't have to be formal leadership development. I would say that is my third leg of my stool when it comes to leadership from day one. I'm not saying people have to go into training classes, because to some degree those are effective and to some degrees they are not. In training classes, you generally learn things in theory, and then we hope that you can make that transfer onto the job. So there's so many things that you can do informally to develop your leadership skills. In fact, I'm writing a blog piece right now on 5 ways that you can develop your leadership skills informally. One of them would just be reading business publications, understanding how business works, reading your industry publications so you understand how your industry works. So if you work in finance for a construction company, you have 2 sets of industry publications there. You have to understand what's going on in your world of finance, and then you also have to understand how finance is operating in the world of construction. If you don't have those 2 background knowledge, it's harder for you to rise into a leadership role because you're not bringing enough to the organization in terms of your expertise. So double down as an individual or as a company, start accumulating the leadership skills or delivering the leadership skills as fast as you can, because we're going to find very soon that leadership is just going to drop off a precipice when the boomers are gone, and the people who've had that 20, 30, 40 years on the job and all the institutional knowledge and have learned leadership the hard way, perhaps, by failing and learning from those mistakes. We don't have time for younger people to learn it that way. We have to have them prepared to step up immediately.
Absolutely. Dr. Nanette Miner, definitely an enjoyable honor and pleasure having you on the Leadership Is podcast.
Thank you.
Looking forward to having you on here plenty times more. Cool. As we have further discussions on leadership development. And so thank you once again. Our audience thanks you. And you take care of yourself.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a pleasure.
Are you promoting the right people into leadership positions? How do you know? How do you measure the outcomes, and are they the outcomes you're looking for? Please visit www.jmleadershipdevelopment.com. Again, www.jmleadershipdevelopment.com, and request a half-hour conversation to assess if we can address your leadership development needs. Oh, and by the way, always remember that leadership is influence and service.
Greetings, leaders. Hey, and thank you so much for enjoying another episode of Leadership is Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2, with my special guest, Dr. Nanette Miner, better known as the Training Doctor. She gave us 3 wonderful tips, and I think they're excellent points of views, especially for Gen Xers and millennials as it relates to leadership development. As you may know by listening to the podcast, that she really deals a lot in developing next generation leaders. And so her first tip was, don't wait for your employer to discover you, right? Take the initiative to discover yourself. If you have that yearning for leadership and leadership development, take the opportunity, take advantage of the opportunity in the time that you have that opportunity to develop yourself. And that's really her number 2 tip, which was to develop your own skills. Take the initiative to develop your own skills. She says she's not a big person or proponent on e-learning, but yet at the same time, whatever resource that you have available to you to develop your leadership skills, take advantage of that. And then number 3, she says, volunteer and document your volunteering, right? And I've done some presentations for nonprofit organizations as it relates to the power of volunteering, how that really could add to your resume if you're building up your resume. As she also stated, Dr. Miner, who I'm speaking of, as it relates to LinkedIn and getting these LinkedIn certificates that are put on your profile, people can see that, you really took the initiative to learn leadership. So really take advantage of that. And you can learn more from her by going to trainingdoctor.com, and she can share some more of her insight as it relates to leadership development. Here at JM Leadership Development, our primary goal is to develop next generation leaders, to leave the bench, embrace the growth mindset towards leadership, and step up. If you would like for us to do virtual assessment trainings or presentations for your hidden leaders or keynote your next event, contact us for a free half-hour conversation at info@jmleadershipdevelopment.com. Visit our website, www.jmleadershipdevelopment.com, or call us at 828-333-7234, and we will respond promptly. Please subscribe to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating on Apple, Google, and Spotify using Jason A. Muhammad /leadership is. Please follow us on social media. Twitter is @leadershipjm. Facebook and Instagram is JM Leadership Development. And always remember, leadership is influence and service.